Now we are able to get a value using a prompt window and change the web page. Are there other ways that we can get values from the user? Absolutely. The prompt window is still a pop-up window and may be avoided by many users. So other ways that we can get it is through text input boxes. So let's go to this section on pet greeting and let's learn about text input boxes. Those are the type of HTML element they are is an input element, and this is a single tag. So this is an empty tag. It doesn't have an opening and closing, just has an opening tag. And we want to specify the type. So there are several different types, and the one that we're going to work with is a text type. And as soon as you do that, what you get in the web page, notice here's our pop-up. Because we have this running, every time we reload our page, we get it. This is going to become annoying so right now, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out so we won't continue to get this prompt. Now when I reload the page, it won't come up. And also notice it's going to write undefined because it's still going there and writing hello their username. Since we've defined that variable but not giving it a value, it is undefined. All right, here with the input box, type equal text, we get this input box. Now notice this doesn't tell the user at all what to enter, and so we're going to add a label, and this is a label tag. So there's the label tag. It does have an opening and closing, and whatever you put in between there is what will show up. So if we do that and we refresh, there's the label and the text input. Notice that both of these are in line. They're not block elements, so they just go one right after another. So now we have a text input, but they're not connected. Notice when I click on that, it doesn't activate the text box. I have to actually click on the text box itself to activate it. So I want to connect these two. And the way that I do that is by using an ID attribute. Again, we want to be unique, so we won't use hello, we'll use something else. And I'm going to call it pet input, and that's the ID on that input text box. And now on the label, we'll use the for attribute for pet input. And that's how we connect it. Add an ID attribute to the input element and a for attribute to the label. And I save that and refresh. Now when I click on the label, it activates the text box. Notice how it brought the cursor there and highlighted it. So it activates that text box, and they're connected. So now I can enter the name of my pet, and I push enter, and nothing happens. And that's because all we've added is the HTML, and HTML doesn't activate anything. So now we need to go ahead and use JavaScript again. Now to avoid this issue that runs every single time we load the page, we can capture our JavaScript inside a function. So, and then just like with any function in all of our languages, they only happen after you call them. So I'm going to create a function, and the way you do that is you use the keyword function and then you give it a name. And I'm going to call this pet message, and right after the name put opening and closing parentheses. And then inside the curly braces. And whatever inside here now, I can write as many different JavaScript commands as I want, and they will all execute when this pet message function is called. So what I want to do is I want to get the value that they enter in here. So I'm going to create a variable to store that, and I'm just going to call it pet name. And that's the variable. And then I'm going to say pet name equals, and here I'm going to go get that element, and I do that by doing document get element by ID. And remember that I have to put which one I want, right? We already have a hello one. That's not the one I want. So I have to look at the ID on it. The one I want is pet input. But now I'm not changing what's between the opening and closing tag. In fact, input boxes don't even have opening and closing tags. So inner HTML doesn't do anything to them. Now what I want is I want whatever value is in that text box. So whatever they entered, I want to get that. And the way I do it is I do .value. And so this says, go get this element and get the current value, and then store it in this variable pet name. Okay, so there we can get the value, and then what do I want to do with it? I want to write it somewhere, and in fact I'm going to write it into a message. All right, and this one I'm going to just add a paragraph. So go ahead and add a paragraph, and I'm going to go ahead and leave it empty. And then I'm going to add an ID value here. ID equals, and here I'm going to call it pet message. And now I can access that. So now I can say document. Notice that we're going to do this a lot. How do you get an HTML element? I do document, get element by ID. I say which one, and I do that with the value of the ID. And then I say, what do I want to do with it? In this case, I wanted to get the value in the text box. In this case, I want to change what's inside that. So I'm going to say inner.html equals, and here I'm going to put the pet name plus is a great pet. And here I am getting pretty long over here, so you can go ahead and put enters in here so you don't get so long you run off the end. Don't break it between quotes because that can throw errors, but you can break it on either side of an operator. So here I just broke it after that equal operator. So now I have this function that I think is going to work. Like logically, I've created the variable, I've gotten the value from the text box, and I've written it out to this paragraph. But we can't test it yet because when I refresh this page, I refresh, I click on that label, I type in Joe, nothing happens. And it's because, notice over here in the console there's no error, so it's not error related, but it's because I haven't called this function. To call this function, I'm going to add a button. So if I use a button has an opening and closing one, and between the opening and closing I can type the words that I want to show up on the button. And over here, this is what I get. Create message. So whatever I type between the opening and closing button show up on the button. So here, notice what you get is truly a button and with a message on it. So now to call that function, I'm going to use the onClick attribute. So I'm going to say onClick equals, and here's where I'm going to put the function call. And this is going to say whenever you click on this button, do this thing, and it's going to call this function pet message. Now when you call the function, you need to put pet message and you need to put parentheses, and that identifies it as a function call rather than a variable name or just a string. So we save that. Now we refresh it. We have this button there. We can go ahead and put the name in here and click create message. What does it do? It calls that function, which creates a variable, gets the value from the text box, uses that value to write to the paragraph, and there we get our message. Notice we've covered a ton in this activity, in this particular video, right? We've learned that we can put JavaScript inside a function. Every time we load, nothing happens here. So our elements are there, but it doesn't run. So it's not going to pop up and run until we, the user, wants it to run. We've learned how to add an input element that adds a text box, and how to create a label that connects directly to that text box. We've also seen how to add a paragraph that we can access with JavaScript because we've added an ID, and then how to add a button that we can use to call that function.